Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Emergency Home Learning Summit. Our guest today is Chris Lehmann, the founding principal of Science Leadership Academy, and say it for me, Chris. The CEO
of Science Leadership Academy Schools. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm going to stop our screen sharing so you can see Chris. Thanks so much for doing this, Chris. It's a crazy time, isn't it?
It's something, that's for sure.
Okay, so what do you actually do in your job?
So, generally, most of my time is spent as the principal of SLA and of SLA Center City, which is the first of the 3 schools we started. And then a significant portion of my time is spent working with the other folks, most of the time with the 2 other principals of the 2 other Science Leadership Academy schools, SLA at Bieber and Science Leadership Academy Middle School. And just so everybody knows, the 3 schools, we are an in-district network. So we are a fully school district of Philadelphia public school network of schools. And we are the first replication model in the school district of Philadelphia since the Parkways in the mid to late 70s. And so it's a kind of a really exciting thing. And I get to work with, like I said, primarily with the principals, but oftentimes with more than that, including, students and faculty of the other 2 schools. Obviously, like everything else, that takes a little bit of a different look right now. But working on the integrity of the model and growing the model and getting better and better and better as this group of 3 schools.
Chris, what were your own school experiences like growing up?
I started out as a child, to quote Steve Martin. And no, so I went to Quaker school for 2 years, for kindergarten and first. And then my parents, I think, quickly realized they could either pay for K-12 or they could pay for college, not both. And so public school it was. And I went to, I went to sort of generic suburban public schools, first in suburban South Jersey, which is a suburb of Philly, and then we moved to Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is also a suburb of Philly. And I had, sort of like the John Hughes, like movie experience of public school. Sadly, I was probably the Anthony Michael Hall geek character a little bit from Breakfast Club, if folks remember him. And, it was big suburban schooling, and where I had teachers who could figure me out and deal with the fact that they had this kind of geeky smart kid in their class who very much marched to the beat of his own drummer. I loved those experiences where I had teachers who expected me to fit into the box of what they expected a student to be. I loved those teachers less. And, but was also sort of schooly enough because I came from parents who both had, my mother was a teacher, my dad was a union lawyer. They knew the game. And what they taught me from a very early age was that, like, number 1, never let school get in the way of learning. And 2, there was a game to be played at school and that you played it. And if you could play it well, you would do well. And so where I had those teachers who were about learning and about the kids in front of them and about all of that stuff, I had amazing, amazing experiences. And I had some teachers who were fantastic at that. Where I had teachers who were like, here's the game, or not even here's the game, because they weren't making it plain to everybody, but teachers who I felt like didn't care about me as a human in their space, but wanted me to, fit into some whatever I was supposed to fit into. Then I was like, oh great, let me figure out the game and let me do well in this class for me, because you're not here for me, so I better be here for me.
So the kids in the science leadership schools, do you talk to them openly about the game?
Oh God, yeah. Yeah. Make this transparent, right? Like, there should not be unspoken rules, right? The rules, the game should be laid bare. And one of the things that we try to do at SLA with the model is, one of our sort of core ideas is that every minute a kid is spending trying to figure out an adult is time they're not spending figuring out themselves or figuring out the work. And so to the degree to which adults can share frameworks, share rubrics, share common language, share fundamental ideals about what we believe in our classrooms, then you are lowering the bar of the game of school for kids and raising the bar for the actual work. And that's a huge tenet of what we try to do, like make the game transparent and make the processes common, right? And just make that very, very, very clear and transparent to kids. Here is what success, here's the game, here it is. And we're all gonna share these values, we're all gonna share these ideas, we're all gonna share these frameworks and tools, and then we want you to use them and we want you to imbue them with who you are and what you bring.
So a kid who doesn't go to one of your schools and who doesn't know that there is a game or even how to play it, what happens to them?
Well, I mean, it depends, right? There's no one answer to that question, but I mean, and I think, the answer on some level depends on how much, where those kids fall in who is valued in society, right? So if you're talking about Black and brown kids, if you're talking about Black and brown kids for whom, there's a wonderful book called Beyond the Bake Sale by Dr. Karen Mapp, and she writes about the fact that parents bring the ghosts of their own schooling experience to their children's schooling experience. So if you're talking about, communities that have been historically underserved by school, then when the kids are underserved, and there is not someone at home who was able to say, like, here's how I navigated it successfully because of the structures that are in place to prevent them from doing so, you see outcomes where kids walk, either A, don't finish school, or B, walk out of school thinking it wasn't for them. It was something to have survived, not something to have embraced. And you're dealing with then all of the challenges that creates. If you're talking about kids who have been privileged in this system for a long time, then they're probably going to get through. And because they have enough of a sort of a social safety net to get them through, but they still won't necessarily think that school is for them. And again, unfortunately, the really damaging thing on some of that is that for a lot of kids across all demographics, there is an equation where school equals learning too much. And so if you look at, I really think that one of the reasons that America is in the predicament it's in right now is we have not taught our citizenry that learning is for them. And so we have a very, very, very anti-intellectual look at the world right now in a significant portion of our population. And that's doing harm, right? Just that's doing harm. So the dangers of getting this wrong, I think we're living, and again, I don't put all of that on school. I don't put the fact that people don't want to listen to science right now all on school. That's not fair. That's not right. But we also have to recognize that we are not a nation that loves learning all that much. That's problematic.
Are there kids that you think leave the school experience wounded?
Oh God, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Damaged, sorry. Principling by text message. Welcome to 2020. But yeah, deeply. And we know that, right? We know that, from the kid whose name is not Anglified, who is misnamed their whole, school career and never therefore even seen, right? Like the kid whose name is never pronounced correctly. The kid who was told they couldn't do something, the kid who, schools, the problem, it's a very, if we acknowledge, we take as axiomatic that schooling can change a child's life and can change the trajectory of a child's life and can have an impact, we have to recognize that that capacity goes both ways. And we have to understand the responsibility that goes with that, right? Like that this is not, you can't just say, oh, school's this wonderful thing that can change the trajectory of a child's life and set them up to succeed and all that thing. And yes, that is true. But you don't get only the positive of that. You have to take responsibility for the fact that if that is true, then it's true both ways. And we can do harm if we are not careful and intentional.
And one of the saddest things I hear is, I wasn't one of the smart ones. What advice do you give parents and students who aren't participating in your schools, who haven't had a great school experience? What do you say to them about their approach to school and to learning?
I think on some very basic level, I think that kids have to understand, or families have to understand, that school is one venue for learning, but it is not the only. And if you're not getting your needs met, number one, if you're not getting your needs met in school, speak up. That's important. I think that too often families are not made to feel like they have agency in school, and kids are not made to feel like they have agency in school. And I think that's wrong. We all have a right. I mean, we have a right to a say in our lives as citizens, as people, as human beings. And school is part of our lives. So we have a right to a say. And if people aren't getting their needs met, they need to speak up and speak out. I believe in call in before call out, right? Like, I believe that you go to school, you say, hey, here's why my needs aren't getting met. How can we deal with that? We have to recognize, of course, and this is fair, that in many ways school is about competing needs, because there's X number of kids and X number of teachers and X number of parents and and underfunding and all of the other challenges that get in the way there. But everybody deserves to have their needs as part of that conversation. How we navigate, negotiate, and compromise on whose needs get met and how and when, that's got to be part of the conversation. And people have a right to a say in that conversation. But if you're told, like, nope, sorry, you're not part of that conversation, then, like, the world is a place where it's like there are avenues you can go to get your needs met. And I think that people will and should.
Was there a moment in your life when you took charge of your own learning?
I mean, the funny thing is I don't think there was a moment where I didn't. That was the house I was raised in, right? Like, the joke of my parents, my father's not around anymore, but both of my parents swear this story is true, and I was too young to remember it. But apparently, according to my parents, I taught myself to read at 2 years old. And when I was 2 years old, like, we were a family that got the newspaper every day. We got the New York Times every day, and my parents would read the newspaper. And so, as babies do, as young, children do, you mimic the behavior of your parents. And so they would leave the paper out, and then I would be reading it. And they thought it was adorable as this kid's pretending to read the paper. And then apparently, according to the story, they realized I was actually reading, that I taught myself to read with the New York Times. They swear that story is true. So I think that, but for me, that's an important thing, because I never waited for somebody to teach me. Like, I believed I could learn. And so I had that ingrained in me from a very early age. And also, like, I was that kid who was like, I used to get in trouble in school all of the time because, like, I used to get in trouble for reading, right? Like, I'd finish my work or do whatever the task that was assigned to me to be done. And then I always had three books in my book bag at all times, like, that I was reading. And so, and I would get in trouble, like, and and I was very lucky. I had the parents I had. Like, there was that moment where, like, a teacher called home on me because I was in trouble for reading in class. And my mother was like, I'm sorry. Was he being disruptive in any way? Because if he was, I'll kill him. You know, because you were a good human, right? Like you had to act well. And she was like, no, he was just sitting reading. He was sitting, but he was reading a book. And my mom was like, is his work done? Yes. Is it done well? Yes. And he was not disrupting anybody with this book. Well, other students saw he was reading. You know, my mom was like, that's on you. And please return my son's book. Like, because he was reading. And so I had somebody who had my back, which was amazing. And, you know, important. And interestingly, and I think, you know, importantly, if you look at what we have built at SLA and you look at these values, these stories, you can see the echoes of them in many of the systems and structures we've tried to build at SLA, right? Right, even down to the notion that every child deserves an advocate in school, right? It shouldn't have to be your mom. I mean, it's great if it is, and moms are wonderful advocates, my goodness, but it shouldn't have to get to that point, right? You should have an advocate in school who says to a teacher, like, hey, you're off base here. Like, let's take care of the kid. And that's where the advisory program comes from, the advisory system comes from, right? Like, we should have those systems in place that allow kids to have agency and advocacy in school.
Is there any specific advice that you're giving students and parents who are learning at home right now? What are you telling them?
We're sorry. You know, this sucks. I mean, I think the biggest thing we're telling them, I mean, there's a couple different things. We just had back to school night last week, so this is actually a timely conversation. You know, what I said to the parents is, please be transparent with us about what you are seeing, right? Because parents have right now, you know, ordinarily, I think parents and teachers, parents in school have different and at best complementary visions of what's going on in a child's education, right? We've got them for 7 hours, you know, for 7 or 8 hours a day. They've got them for 7 or 8 hours a day. Theoretically, sleep has them for 7 or 8 hours a day. But like, so we see different pieces of that puzzle. We see the struggle in school or the success in school. They see the struggle or success at home. And when you work together on those things, you get a full, rich picture of the child, which is why we try to parent, you know, partner. We believe deeply in partnering with our families in the best of moments. But interestingly, in this moment, the parents' window is so much greater than ours, right? Like, we are staring, you know, we don't make our kids turn on our cameras, right? We're guests in their homes. So a lot of times we're staring at, you know, this and trying to assume that we know what's going on. And hey, let's hear it for special effects. But like, you know, so we told the parents, like, if you are seeing things that we are not, now, please do not hesitate to tell us what you see going on, because your window is greater than ours. You know, your window is always important, but now it's doubly important. The other thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to make parents understand why, you know, and families and kids, every decision we make, we try to be transparent in general, but now we're trying to be like over the top transparent, right? Like, so we made decisions that classes, you know, we tried to, not have kids shift gears as many times, go to as many classes a day. So we clamped down on the number of classes kids have a day, but we made them slightly longer. We were trying to make them a mix between online, offline. We were trying to do lots of different things, and we were being completely transparent about all that stuff. We're also being completely transparent about explaining to parents that we're giving more time over, we're taking some time away from class, and we're trying to make sure that every single kid has time to meet with their advisor every single week, one-on-one. Now that you have to give a chunk of time available to that, because even if the kid is only meeting once for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, to free up advisors to have 20 of those meetings every week actually is a lot of time they're not in class, that no one's in, you know, class, because you have to make that sort of, everybody's got to be doing that at the same time. We've also been really clear with parents that we're trying to give a little bit less work, right? We don't think it's as easy, like, to be on a Zoom class all day long and then do Zoom homework, right? Like, that's a lot. So we're trying to sort of ease back on the throttle a little bit of the amount of work that we're giving the kids. which is hard because we still have got to get them into college and we still have to get them prepared. And like, so in some of the classes like pre-calc or things like that, where like these are sequential classes that the next class requires you to have a certain body of knowledge, it's hard. And we're just kind of trying to be honest about that. Like, we're trying to be honest about like, we don't, that, and I think overarchingly, to that end, the biggest message we're sending is what we are trying to figure out right now is what's the least bad version of all of this, right? Like, this isn't what any of us signed up for. This isn't what any of us love necessarily. But how do we make it as least bad as possible with as many moments of good as we can possibly plan for?
Would it make sense for parents whose children aren't in a school that have advisories or advisors to look for other caring adults within the family or even siblings to play that role for students?
Yes. I mean, look, everybody needs a mentor, right? Everybody needs to know who everybody needs their 5 phone calls, right? I mean, that's just a human thing, right? Like, I am sure, Steve, that like when you are grappling with a moment, whether it is personal, professional, whatever, you know who those phone calls are. You know who the people you can reach out to are. And everybody needs that. And for many of us in the adult world, we learn that the hard way, right? Like, we learn that by not having those people. We learn that through trial and error. We learn that through a million different sort of hard, painful ways. And for kids to have that structure is huge. I mean, like, I'll tell you a story like that literally happened this morning and happened last week and now is playing out, is we have an alum who's in crisis right now. And she's in college and is struggling with the moment we're in and struggling with stuff. She's got stuff. And her friends were worried about her. And this kid graduated 3 years ago. And they reached out to me and to her advisor. Right? We haven't been in her life on a day-to-day basis in 3 years. But when she was in crisis, they reached out to her advisor and her principal and said, hey, we need. That matters. So yeah, I think that, I personally think, and I actually know some schools, not just in Philadelphia, I know some schools that are doing this right now, which is that in this moment of pandemic crisis, are actually setting up advisories. So the question, what I would say to parents is, this is the moment to say to your schools, why don't you have an advisory program? And what are you doing to start one? And how are you carving out time to make sure teachers can care for kids better? Now's the moment. And there's never been a better moment to say, like, why are there no systems of care for children in schools that are not waiting for crisis, right? Schools have crisis care for kids, right? Oh, you're in crisis, see the counselor, see the school psychologist if you're lucky enough to have one, like da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But they don't have those systemic ways to make sure that every single child is cared for, especially at the high school level. Elementary school, obviously, you have the same teacher all year long. It's a different model. Elementary schools do a better job of this, I think, in general. But at the high school level, now's the moment. Like, well, if you don't have an advisory program, like, why not? And what's stopping you?
I want to make a tie to a comment you made earlier in the interview, right? Where it's not fair to ask the kids to be trying to figure out about the adults. Mm-hmm. And it feels like that mentor role, that advisor role, needs to be someone who has an interest, but it's not an emotional interest. But it's I'm here to support you. I'm willing to figure it out. But you don't have to worry that I'm going to react negatively. And that can often be hard for parents, right? Because they have such an emotional vested interest.
What are you doing? Yeah. I've never had an emotional response to my own child about behavior that I can absolutely put up with the students I teach. Yeah, that's never happened. Never. Oh, wait. Today, maybe that hasn't happened, I think. Maybe.
So there's the game of school, right? And then there's the real game, which is learning. So, you had some classes where you were really learning, but in the other classes, you had to figure out what the teacher expected and how the grading was going to work so that you could manage your grade point average and get into college. Now we've got the game of school, but it's virtual. So it's an even more
edition, right?
It's an even more complicated game
Right.
making it even harder to get over the game into just the straight learning. What advice would you give parents and students about the perspective of the difference between playing the game and learning in life? Like in this moment of distance learning, what if you're doing something that's not going to reflect on the college admissions application, or it's some other way in which you're defining yourself as a learner, but it's not matching the current game?
God, that's a great question. I think there's a couple pieces of the puzzle, right? I mean, one is in everything you do, there's the moments of the purity of it, and then there's moments, and then there's the slog, right? Like, and there's nothing wrong with kids understanding, learning how to deal with the slog, right? Like, and there's a couple ways to look at it, right? Which is, now one of the things I think school needs to do is they need to explain to people why the slog matters, right? The easiest example of this is coaching, right? Like, very few people like running wind sprints, but most athletes I've ever coached love having legs in the fourth quarter, right? Like, and so if you just make kids run wind sprints, you're kind of a jerk. But if you help them understand that the reason we're running sprints is so that way we can run teams off the court in the fourth quarter, they're going to run the sprints, right? Like, so some of that is making, still making the game transparent. Why are we doing what we're doing is really important. The other thing is to recognize that not every moment is an epiphanous moment. We can't live that way, right? Like, so I have to do, like, I get these wonderful, amazing step back moments in my life where, an alumni calls me up and says, you were this person for me and thank you. And those are incredible. Like, those are life affirming, career sustaining moments of joy and power. And I don't mean power as like power, like powerful joy, like better way to say it. And then when I hang up the phone from those calls, I have to answer district emails about what my schedule of teacher observations are. Right now, I have to do both those things, and I can sit there and say, oh, I hate doing my safety plan, and I'm not even in the building, and who cares, and blah. But I don't get the amazing moments unless I'm willing to unless I'm willing to deal with the slog. And you try to minimize the slog in your life, you really do. But like, not everything's fun all the time. Not everything is epiphanous all the time. Sometimes you just gotta power through the stuff that you gotta do to understand that those things enable the things that feed you and give you strength and joy. And that's a balance. And if there's too much of one, and you can be bad. And if it's too much of like, if you're just, but if there's also too much of just the like, hero moment speech, which is, or the sort of, Perry Mason moment, that's inauthentic too. You know what I mean? Like, you learn how to put in the hard work. So that way, those moments of where you get lucky enough to be someone that other people see as useful and valuable and needed or good. That's what make those moments powerful, right? Like, we joked around. I still remember like one of the first TEDx's we ever did, all the way back it was TEDx New York City. It was at, forget what school. We sat there and said like, like, oh my God, it's been a mind-blowing day. And like, and somebody said like, wouldn't it be great if every single school day was like this? And I was like, no, because it would lose value. And because because you can't have epiphanies all the time. You have an epiphany and then you got to work really hard to figure out what that epiphany means. You got to integrate it into your life. And you got to change systems, and you got to win hearts and minds, and you got to do the work. And we've got to value that too.
I think that's the perfect place to finish. Thank you.
My pleasure.